Okay, so my topic today is about gender identity disorder being added into the DSM in 1980. Gender identity disorder is now known as gender dysphoria disorder. It is when you identify with the opposite sex than the one that you had at birth. Identifying with opposite sex is often accompanied by feelings of distress, conflict, and anxiety. I think it's significant because when I was thinking of historical events that changed psychology, this wasn't something I thought of as important. Not to say that it wasn't important, but it didn't come to mind. So when I saw it when I was researching, I thought it'd be interesting to learn about and to maybe teach you guys something today. So the DSM is a huge part of this presentation as well as this project, so I just wanted to give some background on it in case you guys didn't know what it was. The DSM is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. It is a more common language and standard criteria for the classification of mental disorders. It is done by the American Psychiatric Association. As you guys will see, it's not done every year because it does take quite a few years to get it revised, resubmitted, and republished. So some history leading up to my event in 1980. In the 19th century, we have the first recorded instance of someone being uncomfortable with their sex that they were born with. In 1952, we have the first reassignment surgery in which someone changes their physical anatomy to match that of which they feel. Harry Benjamin first used the term transsexualism in a report he published in which he talked about, in his words, a man who was trapped in a woman's body. John William Mundy advocated for the concept of gender in 1957. He said that it was fluid, that our sexuality may be fluid, and that there's a huge gray area in between that we could do a lot from to learn from. In 1960s, gay activists really wanted to challenge psychologists at the time and how people thought about homosexuality and transgender as being a mental illness, so they took to the streets to hold marches and protests. Unfortunately, in 1973, homosexuality was classified as a mental disorder, which then leads to the DSM, in which 1980, where gender identity disorder is then seen as a mental disorder. So it being added into the DSM, gender identity disorder has gone through 3 different of the DSMs. In DSM-3 is categorized into 3 different types: non-transsexualism, transsexualism, where you might physically change your anatomy, and then a not otherwise specified category, to leave a sort of gray area for anyone else to fit into. Eventually, transsexualism and non-transsexualism would be combined into the official name of gender identity disorder in the DSM-4. And then in 2013, we have the DSM-5, where it is renamed gender dysphoria disorder, where it remains today. The DSM defines it as a conflict between a person's physical or assigned gender and the gender which he, she, or they identify. People with gender dysphoria may be uncomfortable with the gender they were assigned, sometimes described as being uncomfortable with their body, more particularly during puberty, or being uncomfortable with the expected roles of their assigned gender. So there were some immediate reactions right after the first definition came out, during the revisions, as well as still today. So on one side, you have people saying it helps with healthcare. It's having people are able to be treated for something that they're feeling. You can't go into a doctor's office and be treated for something that doesn't exist. So since it's being recognized as an actual mental disorder, people can receive treatment for it. It's also raising awareness and starting conversation for the LGBTQ+ community. It's telling us what they go through and how we can maybe help them. On the other hand, you have people saying it just kind of adds stigma to an otherwise stigmatized group, as well as it doesn't actually help with any physical or mental health services, so it doesn't serve a purpose for being in the DSM. So the APA really heard the backlash from the very first definition, so they wanted to seek help from outside sources to have a better inclusive definition. So they reached out to the Rainbow Health Network, which is a group of medical professionals who actively promote as well as participate in equal opportunity healthcare for LGBTQ individuals. They sought help from the Canadian Professional Association for Transgender Health, World Professional Association for Transgender Health. Prominent members of Toronto's trans community were also consulted, as well as a doctoral student specializing in youth and sexuality. So I'm kind of with the side of the group that agrees that it just added stigma. I believe that you take a group that is already marginalized and pretty alienated and add that what they're feeling and how they identify as a mental disorder kind of adds a burden to their shoulders that they already have. instances in which transgender individuals have been openly discriminated against are child custody disputes, also in employment. Obviously, it's not legal in employment, but it has happened. Marriage continuation, serving in the military, and receiving mental or physical health services. Transgender individuals have been turned away from mental and physical health services for being transgender. It is still up for debate today. Obviously, other people in this classroom probably have different opinions of what I do, but I think it's important to have an open dialogue and an open discussion about what this is to keep the conversation going. There's a question of did it ever really solve anything? And it did. In some people, it helped them receive care that they needed and why they were feeling what they were feeling, and I'm not taking away from that. I just really believe that the stigma that it caused in calling homosexuality and being transgender a mental disorder left a stigma that will never leave now. The DSM also failed to establish medical necessities as a part of the treatment. So like reassignment surgery was seen as a cosmetic surgery, even though someone who was uncomfortable with their gender would obviously feel a lot better and feel more like themselves if they could reassign their gender, but it was seen as not necessary, therefore not part of the treatment. So the reason I think that there was such a problem with this and why I don't agree with it is because it was almost over-inclusive in the definition. It said that prostitution, HIV risk, suicide attempts, and substance abuse were associated with gender identity disorder, and that's more of a stigma and a sense of societal pressures. So just because you have gender dysphoria or gender identity does not mean you're more at risk for substance abuse or suicide attempts. I think the APA recognizing that gender and sex are two completely different things would do well for them. Gender is more how you identify and how you outwardly express yourselves, whereas sex is your physical anatomy. Even in the definition that I showed earlier in 2013, it still calls it gender, but they're not uncomfortable with their gender, they're uncomfortable with how their body is. And I think we should really question if it's abnormal. Is it abnormal because history tells us it is, because we've seen that, and because it's not something we would do? Or is it really that abnormal that someone wants to find themselves and have their body match how they're feeling? And if it's abnormal, does that mean it's wrong? My references, any questions? Okay.
You said that the surgery to change your sex to the way that you're feeling, that wasn't part of the treatment?
No, it was not seen as a necessity. So treatment is more like medication and talk therapy, kind of that. So
what kind of medications do they have
on?
For what?
For like anxiety, for feelings of depression, that kind of mental thing that you go through when you feel that kind of.
All right.
Alex?
So you said a lot of stigma was started because it was entered into the DSM. Do you think that if it wasn't, then we wouldn't have so much stigma that we do now?
I would like to think that, but I think no. I feel like we would have stigma regardless. My standpoint is kind of that something as big as APA saying it is a mental illness gives people a reason to have stigma. Like to say, well, APA tells us this, so isn't it a mental disorder? So I think stigma would still exist, and I don't want to blame APA because what they're doing is trying to help, but I think it really kind of dug their name through the dirt.
I know you didn't specifically look at homosexuality, more gender identity, but did you look at the impact of homosexuality in the first DSM and the actual paper that they used to justify why it was in the first DSM?
Not exactly. I had to do some research because that's part of the LGBTQ+ community. I found that it was really opinion-based in first. It wasn't factual. Like, you can't say homosexuality is a mental illness with factual evidence. So it was really based on opinion, but I didn't look into it that specifically. Yeah.
Do you think Christianity has a negative effect?
Do I think?
Yeah. As a social pressure.
I don't want to say an entire group of people have an effect, but Christianity as a whole, yes, has had a huge impact, but not every Christian is bad and has that effect, if that makes sense. But the viewpoint from Christianity, from the Bible, from some of the things people draw from it, yes, but not every Christian is like. Any other questions?
That's a good time to say we are out of time.